background on the recent crisis is a big word for it, but and how we resolved it, and then we'll go into
Hubbub.
what?
Hubbub.
Hubbub, and then
Sure.
we can go into sort of a deeper presentation on.
Okay. So, thanks for everybody coming out tonight. Recently, Greenwich House proposed, in conjunction with some work we're doing with our behavioral health programs, we proposed merging two senior centers, the Judith C. White Center and Our Lady of Pompeii, into a single center over at 25 Carmine, which is Our Lady of Pompeii. Thanks to the good work of Eric Botcher and Corey Johnson, Margaret Chin and her staff, and many of the members of the two centers, we reached a resolution to not have to merge those two centers. And that resolution is a good one for, I think, for all parties. So what I wanted to do tonight was to basically give people a rundown on Greenwich House so that you can kind of understand what an agency of our type and size does, so that you can get a better sense of the push and pulls that go into managing an organization this complex. And then I will try to answer any questions that you have. So first, let me point out two things. I handed out this piece of paper, or these pieces of paper. Please don't go crazy about specific numbers in them. I want you to remember that the data we used came from a number of sources. It's not clean, as the researcher would say to me, it's not clean. There are some duplicates here and there, but we haven't made a thorough attempt to go through and get precise numbers on everything. I've also culled some information from different data sources that may or may not be the most current, but they are what we have. So please.
Before you launch into it, can you just tell me, are you guys an independent 501c3?
We were founded in 1902, independent 501c3. We're a settlement house. Long story short, at the first settlement house in New York City was in 1886. That's now called University Settlement. The idea was that people purchased a property, settled into a neighborhood, as Mary Kingsbury Simkovich did for Greenwich House, settled into an immigrant neighborhood, essentially established residents, opened up their house to the neighbors, and began to help people acculturate to New York City, because many, especially in Greenwich Village in those days, there were a number, it was a largely Italian immigrant population, not exclusively, but largely. And then the agencies evolved over time. In 1928, for example, there were over 100 settlement houses in New York City. There are only 38 today. So there's still some of them, and some of them, I think there's only about a dozen of the original settlement houses remaining. Most of those are on the Lower East Side. We're a heavily immigrant population. So that's sort of our history. So just to remind you that I will go through the numbers, but try to not get too fixated on whether it's a 1 or a 2 or a 0 or something of that sort, because these are the best data that we have available to us at this point. So if you look at page 1, basically it says this, what I've just said is that we are a settlement house. We were founded in 1902. We provide social and health and cultural and art programs primarily in the Greenwich Village neighborhood. There is an old saw, and if you excuse the sexism of it, it used to go something like, what's your catchment area? It's how far a mother could push a baby tram or a carriage and back in an hour, which is about a 12-block radius. That's still pretty much where most of our members come from, our neighbors come from who are in the Greenwich Village area. We tend to focus on 3 broad areas of service: art and education. I will go through show you the programs in a minute. Health and behavioral health, those are drug treatment, mental health programs. And senior services, which include not only the centers, but we also want to point out that we have a high percentage of seniors who participate in our other programs as well. You may or may not know this, but we run a methadone program, and there's a significant number of elderly folks using that service as well. So when we originally unveiled this proposal, there were 2 linked proposals. One, the committee knows, or at least many of you know, we came to this committee back in February to talk about merging or co-locating our drug treatment programs, which are at 27th Street, and our methadone program at 190 Mercer Street. And then we also, the linked proposal was the merger of the two centers. There are, as you know, or may not know, but you'll see it on the first page, most Department for the Aging, there are 250 senior centers. Most are due to expire their contracts in November of 2018, but the city has agreed to bridge those contracts into the future. They will issue a concept paper sometime in 2019, and they will issue an RFP, a request for proposal, which means that everybody has to rebid for their centers. And
I'm going to do this as we go along. DFTA is the Department for the
I'm sorry, I'll try to remember that.
And a large part of your budget is contracts.
Government contracts, that's correct. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So these contracts will be rebid. They will be issued starting, it'll start on July 1, 2021. In public presentations by the commissioner, she has indicated that, not incorrectly by the way, that senior centers are not equitably located throughout the city. There are some areas that have a high concentration of centers, some that have none at all. And so our sort of principle, the principle behind our thinking was that we run a high risk of losing a center. And that's why we proceeded with the proposal. So if you look at the next page, and just to give you a sense of the kind of stuff that we do, we have 10 locations. We own 3 buildings in Greenwich Village, 27 Barrow, 16 Jones, and 4446 Barrow Street. The rest of the space is leased. So you will see that we have 15 programs. They are broken down on this chart anyway by education, behavioral health, and social services, and what the principal funding sources are. Now this is a very simplified rendition of this, because there are little bits and pieces of government money sometimes that flow into the arts programs, but for the most part, and what drives our revenue flow in the agency, you'll see here, most of those government grant, government contract programs are done with a small grant, but they are driven largely by Medicaid, Medicare, and insurance funding.
So, sorry to interrupt you. So when we look, for example, we're not going to go through these numbers in detail, but for example, when it has a number for senior centers and that's your budget, roughly what percentage of that budget is government contract?
It's all government.
It's all government.
Yeah.
Okay, so all of these numbers are all of these numbers
the ones that aren't government contract, which I've listed here, but where it says tuition,
okay,
that means that it's 99% tuition.
Okay.
People are paying tuition for classes, and that's really how this works. The Children's Safety Project is slightly different.
Oh, I see. Okay, the principal sources of funding.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
And emphasize principle here, because there are little bits and pieces. But the Children's Safety Project, for example, does not have a government contract, but it does bill Medicare and Medicaid and insurance.
I see.
So the largest portion of its funding comes through that, but through fundraising as well, through foundation grants.
So those of us who are looking at these charts on this page, you can see their programs and their principal sources of funding, and then below where you see their program budgets, you know which of these are mostly government contracts and which are funded
Right.
based on, okay.
So when you look at these, what you really will see is that about 36 to 40% of our funding is government funding, contracted funding. That's important for a couple of reasons. One is that if you have a government contract, I don't know if people know this or not, but if you have a government contract, you can't make a profit, right? You can break even or you can lose. That's how it works. If you lose money, you've got to figure out how to pay the difference. If you're not a government contract, if you're a nursery school or a pottery school or a music school, you can make a profit there. With the exception is the Children's Safety Project. You can make a profit there because we don't have a government contract.
Okay.
But these numbers that I've given you are roughly what our FY18, that's the year just ended, what our program budgets were that we were working against. You can see we do about 12,000 people. We serve about 12,000 people that we can actually count. And then you'll see on the age side that we serve primarily in the behavioral health programs, with the exception of the Children's Safety Project, we serve adults. But the nursery school, after school, those are children's programs.
Okay, great.
Okay.
And these numbers for the senior centers, there's a number of 1945 people served overall, and that breaks down into these different. That's
correct. And so as we go along, you'll be able to pick it out.
Okay.
So if you look at the page where it says, and not knowing what anybody knew, I tried to make it as simple as I could.
Yeah.
But if you ask, can you have a surplus or not? This is the way we think about it. So. So there are only a couple programs that allow you to have a surplus. Now, when I say you may end a year thinking that you could have a surplus, you might underspend your government contract. You don't get to keep the money. And more importantly, 2 years later, the city typically, or the state, depending on where your contract is, they will come in and do an audit. They may ask you to pay money back if you can't justify it. So they're heavy paper tracking contracts. You really have to kind of stay on top of those things.
And these items that can have a profit or surplus are primarily tuition driven.
They're all
not entirely
tuition driven. Yeah.
Okay.
With the Children's Safety Project, the exception, right?
Okay.
So rather than give you a long chronology, what I wanted to do was just give you a sense of what we're projecting for FY18. Okay. Now, we've just started putting our audit together and closing the books on the year. Okay. So it was the year ended June 30th, and by and large, years tend to follow subsequent years in performance. Not always, but typically they do. So if you look at these, you can see roughly what we're projecting at this point. Some of those deficits may vanish, some may grow. It's hard to say at this point. But
the items in parentheses are all deficits.
That's correct. Yeah.
And the red ones are...
The red ones are ones I'm going to focus on, because that sort of triggered the discussion.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So there are a couple things to keep in mind, however, which is, for example, if you look at the Children's Safety Project, you'll see it says a $260,000 deficit. That is a very unusual year.
Yeah.
And the reason it's unusual is because we moved the clinic to a new location. We had some staff changes in that, and we're now building the program again. But it typically runs about a $92,000, I think, is over the past 5 years. It runs about a $92,000 deficit. Okay. We make up those deficits with other sources of revenue. We do fundraising, we have leased property, we lease some of our space and so on. That's how we make up deficits.
And that's what it says at the bottom of that page.
That's correct.
Where there's an asterisk that says the note, and that explains that. Great.
But to give you an idea, for example, the Senior Health and Consultation, which is a mental health program, we're anticipating about a $19,000 loss, but most years it breaks even. It just depends on the flow of that year and if anything happens. The two programs that we think are the most volatile in the current environment are the adult drug treatment programs, our outpatient clinic at 27th Street and at 190 Mercer Street. And those are the two programs that are giving us agita every day because because managed care is sort of starting to kick in. There's much more administrative requirements for it. There's a lot more investment one has to make. And one of the ways in which those programs become viable long-term is to co-locate them in a single location. And the reason for that is you can integrate care, which is really important in this world of managed care. You want to be able to integrate care, you want to be able to serve more people, and you want to have flexibility with your staffing and with licensing so that you can provide a greater variety of services and you can essentially pay for yourself.
I have a question, Roy. As far as the drug programs go, since drug addiction is an illness, and is it probably covered by Medicaid or Medicare?
Yeah.
So how do you actually lose money if you have a contract with the state and you also are collecting each time someone comes from Medicare?
Well, it's easy. I'll tell you how you do that. One is you have leasing costs that are exorbitant. They really are. But the other way you do that is that if you have, it's kind of hard for people to understand, but most of these clinics, they're Article 28 clinics, means diagnostic and treatment centers. But unlike hospitals, we're one person deep. So for example, if a doctor takes another job, it takes us typically 4 to 6 months to hire a new doctor. Before you can actually admit people, you have to have a doctor's sign-off. They do treatment plans or essentially prescriptions for services. So any interruption there causes a problem. And that's the sort of the dilemma that we're facing. Now, our clinic is growing in population, or the census is on the rise. The clinic at 27th Street, not so much. It's sort of been static for a number of years, in part because there are somewhere on the order of 20, 25 similar clinics within like a 10-block radius of the place. But it's really that. It's just simply the flow of patients in and out.
Okay, yeah, let's not go too deep into the woods on that. Is there any, can someone back there just close that door? Thank you so much. But I think that the short answer is that, yes, there are certain costs that are variable costs that are reimbursed by Medicaid for drug treatment, but there's a lot of fixed costs.
Well, there's a long story behind
Okay,
it, but it is complicated.
Well, is your office connected, where they just gave you $182,000? Is that office, or I was under the impression that office or building, that the methadone program is there now? No. What drug program? Is there a drug program there?
Our offices are at 27th Street with the outpatient program, not the methadone.
But is there a drug program?
Yes, there is.
And is that the one that you're thinking of moving to Mercer Street?
That's correct.
Yeah,
So wouldn't that be a big savings in rent?
Yeah,
is.
It'll save, true. The problem,
But not enough to cover their,
the problem is that when you co-locate, we don't have enough space at 190 Mercer Street for administrative offices. That's what triggered the second step of this.
Okay. So the second step of this was that when you moved out of 27th Street to co-locate your drug treatment program to stem some of your losses, you also are losing your administrative office space.
That's correct. Yeah, we have to find new offices.
Which puts you out on the market to find new office
Correct.
space.
Right.
Okay.
And that was the discussion that Eric and the internal discussion we had, in which Corey stepped in and said, look, rather than relocate your office to free space, which we have in a building we own, let's make you whole. Let's give you the money you would need to rent office space so that the center doesn't have to merge with the other center. That was the solution.
And that gives you security for how long, do you think?
Year-over-year funding.
Year-over-year funding, okay.
But it
That's
tends to be
important.
stable. We had some discussions about it. It tends to be stable over time.
Okay.
So we will negotiate leases that provide us the security we need in the event that something happens.
Okay.
But we think, but we believe that it's a good solution.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can I just clarify, the last meeting you presented, I thought you were moving into
Yes.
190 Mercer, and is that not happening?
That is happening.
It is happening.
Yes, the drug program is, but not the administrative offices. Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Well, this is a complicated argument. I mean, I understand why nobody gets it. I barely can keep it in my head any given day. So what I wanted to do was to give everybody a sense of the older adults who attend our four centers.
Yes.
And where they're located. Now, you'll have to forgive me, my map abilities are somewhat limited, but
That's okay.
but you'll see on this map you have a map with Greenwich Village,
We don't know where they are.
and it's the one with the yellow guy. So you've got Greenwich Village, and you've got the little bubbles are the three buildings we own, and the stars are the three centers in the area. There is another one downtown at 310 Greenwich. That's called Independence Plaza.
Okay.
And it does not include other centers in the vicinity. There are a couple others, as you know, Sage.
So the stars are where you have senior centers?
Correct.
And the bubbles are buildings that
We own. Yeah.
Okay.
So what we did is we pulled down the numbers from the database that we prepare for DFTA. We have to report monthly on utilization. And so what I did here was just to give you a sense. I wanted to get a sense of where most people came from.
Yeah.
And so what we did is I looked through the numbers. We picked out these 4 zip codes. I will tell you that we have people coming from all over the city. The only borough we don't have people coming from are Staten Island, but we have from all over the city, almost every zip code.
Coming to the senior centers?
Yes. And they come in very small numbers. What the numbers I'm going to show you are the total number of people who walked in the door and registered that they were there. They didn't register that they come for a meal or whatever, but that's who passed the threshold. So we've got those 4 zip codes, and what I wanted to do was just give you a sense of, as best I could, of how what those numbers look like. So If you look at the next page, you'll see I pulled some census numbers. Those are 2016 5-year survey estimates, so they're not exactly current, but they'll give you a sense of the magnitude. And then down below, under the same 4 zip codes, you'll see the number of people from those 4 zip codes that attend those 4 centers. So of the 1,948 total older adults that passed the threshold at one of our centers, 866 of them come from this, these 4 zip codes. And
I'm sorry, 866 out of 1945?
1948.
1940, okay, out of 1948 seniors who come to yours. Okay.
Yeah, if you turn to this page here, it'll just, the numbers.
Okay.
And they come per what? Per week, per year, per what?
It's a total across the threshold during the year. I don't have numbers on how,
Okay.
I have some numbers on, but not on the reasons they came. It just would require so much data sorting that we didn't have time to pull that together.
So, Roy, I'm sorry, just for clarification, there are 1,948 total visits to all of the senior centers?
Total persons who visited one of our 4 centers
Total
during the year.
visits or total persons?
Persons,
So
not
if I
visitors.
go 5 days a week, I register as one person?
That's right, you're listed as a person.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you look at this page with the yellow lines on it,
Yeah.
what I tried to do was take the 4 centers, and then at the end you'll see combined, to give you a sense of where people came from.
Okay.
I want to point out just a couple things. One is I want to remind you, don't take these numbers as, because I couldn't clean them. So there are some. We know that there are, I don't know, 10, 12 people who go from one center to another center in the same day. They get counted. I couldn't clean them out. So, I mean, clean the numbers. So that's where we are. But if you think of it as just a magnitude, you're pretty close, I think. The 2 things I wanted to point out. One is that, for the most part, we're in the low 40s in these 4 zip codes. Most people come from these, or 43 to 44% come from these 4 zip codes who visit the centers. The rest are scattered throughout the city, of those 1,948 people. Pardon me, of the people who cross the threshold. If you look at Judas C. White and Our Lady of Pompeii, and you add those 2 numbers together, that 548 and 325, what you get is the same number pretty much you get per center on the square. So those 2 centers are really being attended by roughly the same number of people. Again, the numbers aren't clean, so there may be a little variance there, but that's really the important thing to
You're
note.
saying that the combined populations from Judith C. White and Our Lady of Pompeii equal the total
They're
population?
if you add those 2 numbers together, you should get 873, unless my
Okay.
calculator
So
wasn't.
they're roughly the same.
So they're roughly the same.
Right.
And that's important to note. Now, what's interesting is that Independence Plaza, which is way farther south, is, it has some members coming down there as well. But if you turn to the next page.
But a question,
Yeah.
you're talking about someone, say I'm a senior that goes to, on the square. I go there and I eat. And then I go to Greenwich House and I eat. So, the same day.
You get counted twice,
So,
that's right.
so same day, but you're counting me twice.
That's
Yes.
correct, yeah.
So, but when you're figuring in how much money you're asking for, how do you know if you're gonna have people eating once? Isn't it supposed to be a meal? 1 meal a day per person?
Tom, we don't have to figure out how much money we're asking for. The city tells us how much money they're going to give based upon how many people attend the center.
But then why do they run out of food so frequently?
Who runs out of food?
Circle on the square, center on the square.
Well, here one of the things that happens is that there are bubbles throughout the year. But we'll get to the numbers later, and
Yeah.
I'll show you.
And let's keep our questions on the specific services and stuff until the end of this, I think, so we don't get too.
So if you look at the next page, what I've done is I've pulled the centers together, and I've just tried to add the numbers together in a different way to give you a percentage of where people are coming from. They tie in with the numbers earlier, but it just gives you a sense of, for each of the centers, where people are coming from and how that's working. And if you look at, and this is where I get the number, there's about 44% from the 4 zip codes. That's basically where it comes
Right.
from. So take a look at the red, the thing on the meals. This is the most important metric for us, if you will. Yeah, it's this one here. So one of the dilemmas with these contracts, there are many more categories of service that we are to provide, having to do with health, exercise, various related activities. But the one metric that is consistently reliable in determining the performance of the center or the meals served. And one of the worries we have, and I have to say I still have the worry, it's part of what we're going to have to focus on in the coming year, is that Judas C. White and Our Lady of Pompeii are under meals by a sizable amount.
Let me ask a question. So, under meals, could you be making fewer meals and then they would be at full capacity? I mean,
No, it has nothing to do. The meals, the way it works is we are required, for example, it says we're required to serve 21,165 meals at Judas C. White. We cook 21,165 meals and we serve 17,000. That's what those numbers mean. Now, there are, I have to say, there are meals that certain people love more than others, and they'll migrate to a center, and you'll see a bubble that day. And you try to make do, but you can't anticipate necessarily where that's going to happen. You'll find there's a seasonality to things as well.
When you say required, you're saying that the city that
The
did
contract.
that requires you to do that,
Yeah.
and if you fail, if you continue to miss those numbers, do they threaten giving you a lower contract?
That's where
or
we're
is it
going.
all-
That's where we're going.
Okay.
Yeah. And the thing about it is that, you know, so you have a daily average, 71 and 62. Even Center on the Square, which I think if anybody who's been there, Tom, you would know this, it's busting at the seams most days. It's pretty busy there. And still it's underperforming, but not in a significant way here. Independence Plaza started out as a little satellite operation. People may not know, but the Caring Community was an independent organization that was founded to run senior centers. Actually, my predecessor helped found that organization, was the chair of the board for a while. But it hit some financial troubles, and so we acquired those centers, and we've been working on bringing those centers up since then.
Roy, I'm talking about the food. I don't know if the members of the committee are aware that Judith White is the only of the senior centers that you have where the food is prepared on site.
That's correct. That's
The
correct.
others come from catering service.
That's correct, yeah.
Good.
And that gives more flexibility for Judith White because they don't have exactly the same rules for storing the food overnight. We've been told that if they have extra food at Judith White, they can keep it a certain amount of time and perhaps redo it the next day. Whereas our meals, like the catered meals, they can only be used that day. If they're not used, they have to be thrown away.
They have to be, cannot be reused because of health department requirements.
Okay.
Yeah. So essentially what we were very concerned about, we remain concerned about it, quite honestly, is that the attendance at these two centers is low. Mm-hmm. And the question is, how do you get that attendance up? Now that we have this solution to the problem, before Corey Johnson stepped up, the bigger question would have been which center is going to close, because one undoubtedly, in my view, undoubtedly will close when they recontract in 2019.
Because the city will determine that this neighborhood doesn't have the need.
That's correct. And the fundamental problem we face is that we all believe the elderly population is growing, and we don't want to see resources taken away. But if you look at the numbers that and the meals that they require us to serve and so on, by every metric that Department for the Aging uses, we would be underperforming on all four centers. And that's the problem for us.
So is it that DIFTA recognizes like you're a worthwhile center if you're serving 100 meals, but if you're only serving 25, you're not even worth anything?
You know, I got to tell you, I've given up trying to understand DIFTA. But what I can say is that as as time goes on the horizon, everybody agrees that if you're underperforming, it'll affect your budget. So when these contracts are rebid, if we can't say to them that we're going to provide X number of meals, they will say, well, we don't think you can do that. Or they will say, you're too low performing, we don't even want you in the game, combine, do something. So we would rather be active in deciding our own fate rather than having somebody else do it for us. That's really so this is a sort of a strategic initiative as much as anything. I just want to give you a sense of the distance between the centers. I did this little bubble thing here with the lines on it. Now, before I talk about it, yes, I know that elderly people walk slower sometimes. It's more hazardous.
If at all.
You get around with it. So, but anyway, what I did is I just went to Google Maps. I said, what's the distance between the centers? What's the average walking time? And so what you see, though, is that what you see is Judas C. White and Our Lady of Pompeii are about 0.2 of a mile. For those of us who use Google Maps all the time, that's 1,000 feet. So it's somewhere on the order of about 300 to 400 steps, somewhere in that order. And it's about a 4-minute walk. And then you look at between Judas C. White and Center on the Square, it's a 0.3, a 7-minute, and Center on the Square and Our Lady of Pompeii is about 4. So you can see that these are all in pretty close proximity. Even if you can't visualize it, if you don't know the centers, you'll see that at least in miles they're very close, even if you disagree with the time of how long it would take. And Independence Plaza is way downtown, so it's a little bit farther. Anybody tried to walk that? I don't even do that. So.
And do you have a rough sense of what percentage of your population comes in with mobility issues on wheelchairs or walkers or exercise?
I would say, I don't have off the top of my head, but I would say that there are probably, at least as far as I know, about a handful, but that could be misleading because I'm not there every day.
Right.
For example, Center on the Square has a nice graduated walkway that is wheelchair accessible and easy to walk. 27 Barrow Street is not that way. It has steps. Wheelchair accessibility is a real issue with all of the, as you know, in the village, it's a real issue with all buildings. We do not have an elevator. That is, we can get a wheelchair in, a sort of traditional wheelchair, but not a motorized one. So people tend to go, if you have mobility issues, you probably are going to Center on the Square.
Okay.
Although you could go to Our Lady of Pompeii, but the elevator there is a manually operated elevator, which could be a little bit slow for you.
Okay.
Okay.
I just want to, we're going to take questions from everyone here. We're going to go this way.
Okay, so we had some thoughts behind merging the centers. Part of it was that they were close. We also believe that Judas C. White's space is very limited. If you don't know the center, there are essentially 2 rooms. One's a large dining room, one's a kind of a smallish dining room. And they have access to a gymnasium and an art room and some other space when needed. But it is a very small center, and it's on the 4th floor. It's a very small center by most standards. As I mentioned, both the centers we believe are underperforming, and we believe that one of them was at risk, probably one, at risk of defunding in the future. And so we wanted to see if we could secure the resources. The plan to merge them, I think, could still be thought about in a somewhat positive light. There would have been no reduction in services. We've been able to serve a lot more people. The numbers that we have here are that Our Lady of Pompeii, provided the access issue could be resolved and satisfactorily, you would have more than twice the space of that both centers currently have, which gives you a lot of flexibility in programming. We have someone who actually will still be working with us on designing the space that we'll be using in the center. It'll stay the same as it was, but we'll be using that. But in any event, we'll have portable walls, things of that sort. So we think there were some reasonably satisfactory ways in which we could have used the space more flexibly, and we could have done more group activities. One of the areas where we're really concerned going forward, and this is just part of the nature of life in the city, is what's often referred to now as the social determinants of health and healthcare. So we're interested in exercise programs, healthy eating, and classes of that sort to keep people more engaged in the community and not held up at home. So, and we just think generally we could provide more services there, and that was one of the driving thoughts behind it. We also think that it would, as I've already mentioned numerous times, it would have provided some long-term stability to funding. Our Lady of Pompeii, I know it had a bit of a bad reputation 3-4 years ago, but they've got some new people there. They're very eager to be involved in the community and be helpful. So they offered a very reasonable long-term lease, which allowed us to use all of that space. It would have also been helpful for the financial resiliency of Greenwich House, because as I pointed out, some programs are chronic deficit programs, but there's a sort of an up and down, a fluctuation to it that can raise havoc some years, and we didn't want to be in a position of having to close services provided in our neighborhood. We really wanted to keep everything we have because we are attached to them. And so at the end of the day, by by co-locating the drug programs at one location, and with Corey Johnson's generosity, we are able to provide, we have enough resources to rent space so we don't have to dislocate the...
To rent office space, so that you don't have to dislocate and co-locate.
Roy, wasn't Margaret Chin also...
Yes, I'm sorry, thanks for reminding
me.
me.
You haven't mentioned Margaret Chin.
No, I did mention her, but I don't mention her enough, thank you. No, Margaret Chin is... Margaret Chin is very generous, and just the point, just everybody should know that the budgets that you have for these centers are not the DFTA budgets. Those also include money that Corey Johnson kicks in, Margaret Chin kicks in. For example, they give small grants to offset food costs, to offset other costs. So most of these programs, I mean, it's a rule of thumb, it's not exactly accurate, but government contracts never pay for themselves. They usually pay for about 85–90%, and you have to raise money for the rest. That's true of senior programming in particular.
Where do you generally raise money from?
Foundations, private donors. We lease our space to a theater. We have a nursery school that generously can pay rent, so that's how we offset our losses. That's how, not this past year, thank goodness we're kind of at a break even on the senior center budgets, but in previous years when we were running big losses, that's how we offset them, was through nursery school rental income. So we know we've got to do some work to improve the centers. We've already started doing some of that at Our Lady of Pompeii. We've actually had a professional company paint the place so that it doesn't look so basement-y. Put new lighting in. Some of you have visited. It looks better. It's not a happy thing to say, but we replaced the leadership in that center, and so it's now operating in a very, I think, satisfactory way. We're going to invest in some new furniture and computer labs. We want to do some, as I said, space dividers, because we do want to be able to use that space. And part of what's really important for everybody to know is that this past year in 2018, the Department for the Aging issued these so-called model budgets, these mysterious model budgets, in which they allowed us to invest some of those resources, some additional resources for last year for the painting and the lighting and things of that sort. But going forward, it allows us to actually provide sufficient administrative staff to run those centers. You may, with the exception of Judith C. White, every center we have basically has one director and some kitchen help. You can't run a center, you can't feed people, clean the place, do all the data input that the city requires, and so on. So now we'll be able to uplift that staffing to a higher level. But more importantly, it's also provide additional funding for consultants, because what drives people to a center is partly the food. I mean, there's a lot of food insecurity in the area, but partly what drives them is the activity. So now we'll have more resources that we can pay consultants to come in and do a variety of activities, many of them evidence-based practices that we are required to do, but a lot of it is for other activities as well.
So when you say consultants, you mean people who come and
Yep.
teach a class?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of one of the things that we're trying to do. On the back page, it's kind of given our best thinking from our staff and others. We've had some consultants in past years do some review of the service needs of the neighborhood, and these are the kinds of things that they are recommending that we focus on. A lot of cultural enrichment, art, theater, and so on. We have a very lively theater club. Getting people out to the theater is really important. I think our biggest challenge going forward is how to get the theater club at Judith C. White to share with some of the other centers. That's always been an ongoing issue because centers have a very particular identity of their own, and they like to burnish their center rather than share sometimes. We want to focus a lot on health and wellness. And we want to pay a lot of attention to nutrition. We have some collaborations now with NYU Hospital as well as the university for nursing services and so on. So we want to bring a lot of that in. Again, we want to pay some attention to the social determinants of health, because when people get out and are doing things, they are more likely to be healthier. So that's really kind of where we are today.
Great, thank you so much for this. So we're going to start out with just questions from our committee, and then we'll broaden it to this committee board too, and then to all of you. Anyone want to ask? Any start?
I do. I go to the center about every day. So
At Center on the Square.
Which one do you go to? Center on the Square?
On the square. And when it's the problem why more people aren't coming to eat there is because some days the food is terrible. And today was one of them. Today, the food, you don't know ahead of time whether it's going to be good or bad. Today, just to make it personal, today they had eggplant and spaghetti, and it was like mush. And there were 6 people at my table. They all said, mush, we can't eat it. Now what happens, Laura works very hard to try to get the menu appropriate.
Yeah, this is Laura Marcheka, who's the center director.
However, it's sometimes out of her hands. Sometimes the food is very good. Sometimes it's excellent. Other times it goes right in the garbage. So if people see, the menu is circulated. So if some people look at the menu and they see that there's a
Eggplant
turkey
spaghetti.
or turkey burger, you're going to get very few people that day. Now also, if you look at the statistics in a general way, you'll see Monday seems to be a very popular day for people coming. And they think it's because the people have been alone all weekend and they're looking forward to the activity and the food. So to cut this short, somehow the food, if the food could be improved, you would get more people coming. It's like anything. If you open a business...
You feed them, they will come.
Yes. So my suggestion is somehow to work with... The other part is the caterer frequently forgets things and nothing is done about it. For instance, we get butter every day, most every day, and people are used to it. Many days it doesn't come. And then also other things don't come, and I don't, it's a problem.
Well, let me answer a couple things. One is, you know, because you were involved in it, that the previous caterer wasn't very good.
This is the best we've ever had.
I know, that's my point, that's my point. But everybody got involved in selecting the caterer. The staff make regular visits to the caterer's kitchen to inspect. That is important. But I will tell you, I can't actually tell you any given day how I would fix that food. But I do think that Laura Marcheka is the person who can do it. And I think if you, through your advisory committee, you can work with her. If you want to go, I mean, I'm okay with this. I don't have a problem. If you want to look for another caterer, we can do that. I think it's the nature of catered food to some extent.
Well, since we're talking about catered food, we worked for over a year to find a better caterer. And it turns out there are very few caterers that fit into the possible programs Department for the Aging. I think when we did it 4 years ago, there were maybe four places.
4 or 5.
And one of them was Roosevelt Island, one of them was Brooklyn. We went to all of them. The food that we're getting is far superior to what we used to get, but it's not always good enough.
That I don't dispute. I
And so I
can't,
think that's something that, and if you focused on that, you'd get more people, and you would have more to show the
Tom, I want
city.
to give you a slight counter-argument based upon the actual numbers you have in that packet I gave you.
But they're not accurate.
No, they are accurate. The number of people who we serve average, that's absolutely
You
accurate.
think so?
I know it's accurate. I absolutely know it's accurate because I designed the report that everybody gives me every month and I check it.
Well, but the city has a policy that every time that you come in, you have to use, this lady has it with her, I think, but you show, they log you in.
Or you sign
So,
it.
well, they log you in.
They do log in, but you have to sign it.
So therefore, there should be 100% accuracy, because every person goes through, their card goes through the machine.
Well,
Tom,
let's
I'm just
not
gonna
worry about
have
100% accuracy, but let me just say this. If you look at Center on the Square's number of meals served, and you look at Judith C. White, that cooks meals, and by your
Yes.
argument has some flexibility there.
Yes.
Why isn't Judith C. White's meal number higher if the food is so good and it's cooked? Now, I'm not saying it's not important. What I am saying, it's not decisive in deciding how this works. So I do think that there are ways one can work on that issue.
I'm just gonna, let's try to provide our input, but let's try not to get too much into the weeds, because we could be here all night with a lot of things. I'm hoping that this will be an opportunity for you to receive input, and then to have some questions answered about going forward.
I was
So-
just wondering, how many of your attendees to the centers are on restricted diets? Does that affect the number being low, that people get there and then
We
they...
still count those as food. I mean, mostly it's vegetarian. I don't think there are too many, Tom, you might even know better than I do, but I don't think it's too many. Judy, restricted
No,
diets?
and the thing is, there are certain regulations with, I'm Judy Levin, I'm the Director of
Hello.
Senior Services. And the meals, the Department for the Aging actually regulates, the sugar and the salt, so there is at least some regulation. But in terms of restricted diets, I
I
don't.
think vegetarian is about as close
And
we
there
get.
is a vegetarian meal offered
Yeah.
at Center on the Square.
Not
Rachel?
always.
My question is,
Yeah,
have you,
please.
I assume you've looked at the various reasons there might be a lower, I'm assuming the need is still there. There are a lot of people out there, probably a lot of food insecure people. So aside from the quality of the food, there must be some other reasons why people are not showing up. And whether they need help getting there, or, all of these people are aging in place presumably.
Yeah, I think
And as they age, it's going to get harder and harder possibly to get to the center. And maybe that's another kind of service that might be thought about, is to help them to come in so they can have a social, or to bring food in. I don't know whether it's a whole
Yeah,
separate
I know.
thing.
I think that's a really huge issue. The bubble is coming, because if you look at the numbers of the people who come to our centers, you'll see there is a 70 to 80 age group, and then there's an 80 plus, and there's a 90 plus. Now, I'm not sure the 90 plus is going to grow significantly, but I am pretty confident that the 80 to 90 is going to grow, and that typically means more frequent health problems, limited mobility, things of that sort. So I think that's an important issue.
I have a question about Our Lady of Pompeii. As you go forward and you're starting to make renovations, I wonder if there's any opportunity to hear from the community about things that they would like to see there, things that would be make the space more appealing. I visited and I was trying to find out from the few people that I saw there why they chose that site over other sites. And one said, I grew up in this neighborhood. But as you go forward and you do these renovations, it might be nice to have an opportunity to hear from people about what they would like to see, now that we have a little bit more time going forward before you have to.
Well, there's no
consider this again.
doubt we want to hear what people have to say, because we have to drive people to the center, so for sheer survival.
Right.
So we're happy to hear what that is.
So maybe we could plan sometime later this year when you come, we can just have like a kind of scoping session, or just a brainstorming session where everyone just throws ideas at you, like, I wish I could knit there, or I wish I could, have a place to meditate, or whatever
I
it
think
is.
what we ought to do is have that meeting, actually have it there.
Well, that would be great. That would be great. So we might think about doing that
I'm sure Nicole
sometime.
Brown, who is the relatively new director of the center, would love that.
That would be great, because I have a feeling, without knowing too much about it, that this issue is going to come up again.
Which issues?
Well, the issue about whether 2 centers need to be located.
I
I don't know.
I think
but-
you're absolutely right.
but
That's why I think it's important to push those numbers hard if you can. I mean, the thing is, it isn't merely kind of cramming people in there. The idea is, what do you do to make it so enticing that people feel to come? That's the goal, and I think there's some reputational issues. There's lots of things.
We're going to come to the public in a second, but I wanted to give Terry a question, an opportunity.
One quick question. The goal of future programming, make the center work better for the people that we need to serve and build a better and they will come. But it seems that the lease on 27th Street is still time limited. Are plans to expand into Pompeii still going forward?
No.
And so what will happen with the other space there, and how long do you have on your lease on 27th Street, and what happens when that is up? Does that still continue, as Eric said, the year over year? Is that now staying, or are the possibility, to Susanna's point,
So
of
here's
a
the,
co-location
our board
continuing?
has made a bet that those funds will remain long enough to give us the comfort we need to make an adjustment through this stuff. Will we will continue to use the same roughly 3,000 square feet at Our Lady of Pompeii that we currently have. The church no longer, or at least it hasn't in a long, long time, been leasing the space for other purposes. They are actually allowing us to use almost the full space in any event. So we think that we'll be able to work through with them, and I am now back renegotiating a lease with them to extend the current lease because it expired on June 30th. And we have they gave us a sort of short-term extension to work out the details on this. They are disappointed, you can imagine, that it isn't going to be there, but they understand and they're coming back with other proposals. So we'll work that through. We don't think that's going to be a huge issue with us or with them. And as far as 27th Street goes, we will find another tenant for that building, and as soon as we do, we will move.
Got it. Okay,
So, Roy, hi, I am Mona's daughter, that's my claim to fame. I have a few questions, but I'd also like to put it out there that, based on my past experience, if I could be helpful in a personal capacity, I would be more than happy to work with your team to come up with some constructive ideas. I noticed in your presentation and in some of the things that you said that to me it seems like the Judith C. White operation is one of the more successful operations amongst the four. And
well, it depends what you mean. Yeah.
so just comparing like for like amongst those four locations. But I just have, I'm going to put four out there. Number one, how many independent organizations are under Greenwich House, separate from?
We have 2 501c3s.
Okay.
Greenwich House and the nursery school.
And the nursery school. And then, how much does the board raise?
A fair amount, about 550,000, Andrea? 550,000 or so a year. That's on their direct contributions, I think.
That's,
Give that?
Get is about 586,000. And
Of a total of about 1.2?
3, yeah, 2 to 3.
Okay.
wait, what was the 1.23? What numbers?
The total fundraising.
Their
Oh,
philanthropy,
Thank you.
private philanthropy. Do you get any foundation money, or are you
Of course.
prohibited?
No.
No.
Are you kidding? We couldn't survive without it.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you include that in your grant numbers, or do you include that in your private philanthropy?
And there's private grant funding and there's government fund, and city government funding. which
Okay,
are
so you
separate.
include that in your
So-
private funding?
Correct.
Yeah,
So
any
there's-
foundation money is privately raised.
Okay. No, I'm just trying to understand where you
Yeah.
place it in terms of your,
So does that mean the foundation money is part of the total 1.2 million?
1.3, 2,
1.3 million?
yeah.
Okay.
It has to be by definition.
Yeah, just to clarify.
we're just trying to clarify over here. How do you use volunteers to augment the money that you are raising through staff? And how do you use volunteers to deliver perhaps some of the services such as teaching art classes or exercise classes or other ways to engage the community along with the seniors? That's one remaining question. And also to raise money, obviously. And then with respect to your real estate, have you looked at ways to repurpose the theater space? Have you solicited the real estate developers within the district?
So let's start with the real estate.
Okay.
We are not interested in monetizing our facilities, either selling them or doing something different.
No, I meant soliciting space from others for example, for your admin space. We have Google in the neighborhood, we have Taconic, etc.
We are just starting that work, but we on the theater, we are not going to repurpose it. Actually, we've probably tomorrow we will sign a new lease with Ars Nova, which you may know is a theater company that's based uptown on 54th Street. I mean, it's most well known these days because Lin-Manuel Miranda got his start there. And we'll be working with them and working on some theater classes, programs for young people, for older people. You know, we want to do some community programming in the theater. So that theater will not be repurposed for any other purpose at this point.
But you are looking for in-kind gifts from developers, real estate?
Well, we do that pretty regularly, actually. I don't think that should be the issue.
The nature of the neighborhood has changed substantially.
Well, we know it's changed substantially, and frankly, that's why if you look at our numbers over time, why the nursery school is growing so rapidly. It started out when we acquired that nursery school back in 2000, 2001, somewhere in there. There were 30 students. It was a little...
But your philanthropy has not kept pace. That's the point that I'm making.
Well, it depends what you mean by that, but...
It's relatively small compared to other settlement houses.
I don't think that's quite true, but anyway, it's an issue. That's largely, in part, driven by board relationships and so on.
I think one of the things that you were asking also was whether there was any merit in seeking in-kind donation for a long-term lease of administrative offices. Is that what you're saying? So that's one question, that now that the emergency is off, if that's an opportunity that
it's an opportunity when you can find it. It's not an opportunity you can't. But that's one of the reasons why we are expanding our board, bringing on new people who can be of some assistance there. But long term, I find it a little hard to believe that free space is going to be available to us. I just think the neighborhood is what it is. It is changing, or it has changed, and I don't think that's going to reverse itself in the near future.
Great. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jessica Aaron. I'm actually the public
Oh,
member. I'm sorry.
hi.
I came in late.
Sorry, and I've never met you. I'm so sorry that I totally missed you. This is Jessica Aaron, who's on she's a public member of our committee.
Why don't you come up?
You're welcome to come up and join
I
us.
didn't want to
All right.
interrupt. But my question is, and maybe it's for you.
Can't hear you, though.
Is it
I'll
possible
translate
for the
for you.
city to provide us demographic data on how many seniors, and I apologize if you covered this before I came in, but is it possible for the city to provide us demographic data on how many seniors we have living in our community district, so we have that? So maybe, has anyone done projections?
Yes, no, you can get that information. I mean, I've been trying to cull that information. It's not, I don't think.
We're trying to figure out how many people we should be serving in these
What is she
seniors.
asking?
She's asking for demographic data on the number of seniors in our community
The
district.
Department for the Aging provides some of that, but it's dated.
So it is dated.
The borough
2010, I
president's
believe.
office has that
I mean,
information.
How many, I know that you have an issue with the city, the contract, they won't give you a contract unless you can serve X amount.
Well, the way you get it, to be
Right,
honest with
exactly,
you.
I understand that.
No, the way you get it is you go to the census. Go to the census website, so you do searches and data.
I'm just
I've
wondering
started
if it's
that,
a part of
actually.
your thinking, and maybe it should be a part of our thinking, when you're deciding whether or not you should consolidate, and what is the true number of meals or individuals that we should serve, in the next 5 years.
Well, I got to tell you, as I mean, I haven't been a researcher in many, many years, but I think that's probably a question that's going to be hard to answer. I think you can make some rough estimates of what need are based upon income and things of that sort. But I think, I think the biggest challenge nonprofits have generally is, increasingly they're moving in this direction, but you don't have data scientists who can sort of pull that stuff together for you. It's very complicated to do well, and I raised two researchers, and we debate research methodology at dinner table. I'm telling you, it's not exciting, but we do, and I have to tell you that I think there are a lot of complications with that. But I have recently, I'm in a work group with United Neighborhood Houses, which is an umbrella group for settlement houses. And I've been pressing really hard to have an academic advisory group that does that research. NYU, for example, is doing some tremendously important research, and no one knows about it. And I think that that's the kind of, we need people who can actually pull that data down, analyze it. A lot of it's driven by age and income and sex, and there is now an enormous amount of health data that in aggregate, sort of metadata that one can use. I just think that if you're not doing that, you're not going to survive. But I think the community needs to know it. But here's the bigger problem, and this is, I think, just something that people have to fully appreciate. Nonprofits operate in this environment, and we do sort of what we do, and we analyze as best we can. But there is very little. There isn't a disconnect, and it's an institutional disconnect, because at the end of the day, a nonprofit's board of directors and its staff work for that organization and have to make decisions based upon available resources and things of that sort. That doesn't tell you, so when I give you the numbers about Greenwich, it doesn't tell you anything about what you should be asking for. It just shows you what we have today. Okay. And I think that's the big challenge. It is complicated, but I do think that if I were planning this, I would go to NYU, and I would say, and I don't necessarily mean the schools of social work, but I mean sociology, political science, economics. They've got some great people working there doing really important work, and hardly anybody reads that stuff, and it's important.
Do you know if the seniors who visit your centers are all low income, mostly low income?
We don't know their income.
You don't know.
So we're not required to collect it. Neither can we collect health information, things of that sort, because it's HIPAA protected. So there's just a lot of restrictions. But you don't have to be, you can look at broad data and dispersion in the community to figure out where people are. People, I'm assuming in their 90s have pretty much used up their retirement incomes if they had it. Given what Greenwich Village was 50 years ago, one can assume they didn't have large retirements. So that's why food insecurity is a huge issue, it seems to me. Even though I don't have any numbers for it, I do know that people migrate from center to center. We have a number of people who, a handful, but it's an important handful, who live in homeless shelters and come